He hands over airtime to the public. Tonight, the Radio Society of Great Britain with the world at their fingertips.
Back over to you then, Joachim, see how things are in Freiburg this morning. This is GW3 and direction Cardiff South Wales.
This reading Juliet in Freiburg. I'm very, very sorry to hear that Joe hasn't received his information yet. But last week I talked to VK2ATW in Sydney. In Freiburg. I'm very, very sorry.
Hello. For an actor who's lost his trousers some 12,000 times on stage to try and get laughs, you might think the word ham really does apply. Well, I admit I am a ham, but in the amateur radio context of the word. It's a hobby which has interested me ever since my brother Malcolm, G5GX, fired my enthusiasm some 42 years ago, and I managed to get my license, becoming at that time the youngest operator in the country. But radio amateurs, the real hams, tend to look ahead rather than backwards. They don't talk much about history, but there can't be many hobbies that can genuinely claim to have been responsible for a whole new era in communications and broadcasting. Some 50 years ago, radio amateurs opened up the short waves. It's a remarkable story that should not be forgotten today, when so many people think scientific research is strictly for the professionals.
Amateur experimental radio is as old as radio itself. Marconi once said, "You know, I always think of myself as an amateur." At the turn of the century, Marconi and his assistants went round to many towns in many countries talking about his new wireless telegraphy. Young people's imaginations were fired at the idea of a system without wires and which could communicate by generating a spark. One of the young people in those days, R.D. Bungie, remembers what it was like.
We were regarded by the general public as magicians, something kind of supernatural. But I think we rather kind of rolled in that. It amused us. I don't think we were any different then to what one is now. It was a question of the problems you had to meet and the difficulties of communication of any kind.
And it was always in the news. Exciting stories of saving life at sea, or the arrest of Crippen, the murderer, when he tried to escape across the Atlantic. It was soon realized that this new hobby had to be controlled and regulated, and experimental amateur radio was recognized in the very first radio laws, the Wireless Telegraphy Act of 1904. In 1912, when official licenses were introduced, the amateurs were told that they could only use wavelengths of 200 meters and down. Wavelengths then regarded as useless for serious communication. They won't get out of their own backyards, was the general belief. But the amateurs soon proved how wrong were the experts. In the early 1920s, when valves were replacing the spark transmitters, it was the amateurs who quickly showed that signals on short wavelengths could and did often travel all round the world. Bill Corsham, called G2UV, took part in the first transatlantic tests, still an active amateur today. Jack Partridge, a BBC engineer, but also holding a G2 call sign, and the first British amateur to ever make two-way contact with North America. Cecil Goyder, a schoolboy at Mill Hill School, when, in 1924, he made the first two-way contact with New Zealand using the Kleb transmitter at the school. Amateurs, you know, had even helped to start domestic medium-wave broadcasting in Britain, and were themselves allowed to broadcast programs before the setting up of the original British Broadcasting Company. Soon, of course, everybody began buying crystal sets and headphones. So the amateurs kept moving down in wavelength, down to 5 meters, and there's a good deal of evidence that their success, particularly when using 5 meters from aircraft, led directly to the RAF fighter radio system and also police radio, both just in time for the outbreak of war in 1939. But don't get the idea that it was all serious. What the early amateurs did was to prove that there's a lot of pleasure in doing your own thing, and it's fun finding out.
So that's how the hobby started. Today, as you can see, modern technology has reduced the bench-top array of components to very small compact units. This little goodie is a combined transmitter and receiver capable of reaching all parts of the world with ease. But even with this advanced equipment, you don't have to be an electronics engineer to operate it, for today's amateurs still come from all walks of life, as David Thomas has been finding out.
Britain's army of 22,000 radio operators are a closely knit community. housed in garages, attics, sheds, schools and colleges. They're capable of contacting some of the remotest corners of the world. It's a rewarding activity, the end product resulting in a bizarre technological pen pal system. Each ham, as they're called, is given a call sign, easily recognized with the help of reference books right across the world. Radio hams pride themselves on their contacts, and many lifelong friendships are often instigated through the radio networks of the ham world.
WSU Mobile, GW4GSH. Good afternoon.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I'm all in now. We should be in about 3 minutes. We've just turned off the main A48, over.
Okay, I'll have your meal ready when you arrive. GW3WSU Mobile, GW4GSH.
GW3WSU Mobile. I've got Dave with me, GW3RWX, okay?
Colin Bainan has been active in amateur radio for the last 12 years. He's a lucky man because his wife Margaret shares his enthusiasm for the hobby and is a licensed operator herself. It's very convenient for them to talk to each other on his mobile transmitter. I went with him to his home outside Cardiff to talk to them about this shared interest.
Margaret, dare I ask, what brought you into the hobby?
I think I became interested through Colin being interested, and I've always supported him in amateur radio events, and I thought it would be very nice to speak on the radio as well.
Great. It's rather strange to have girls coming into the hobby. Did you have any great difficulty with the exam?
No, not really. I attended the Barry Technical College on an evening course, and sat the exam at the end of that year, and I found it quite easy, really.
Lovely. How about the Morse? How did you get on with it?
Oh, quite well. I quite enjoyed the Morse, learning Morse code. Colin did help me and teach me, and I got on quite well with it.
Oh, great. How much has the hobby cost you in terms of keeping the interest going?
You were speaking over about 12 years, £400, something like that.
Oh, it's not bad. In fact, it compares
bad.
favourably with the photographic sort of thing, doesn't it?
It started off with some very second-hand equipment, very old equipment, which costs a matter of £25, £30 to get on the air virtually.
Right, Margaret, what friends have you made overseas so far in amateur radio?
I've made quite a few, and I have a schedule every week with another lady, Patricia in Illinois, KA9ALI, and it's very interesting. We've become very good friends.
Yeah, how about you, Colin?
Well, I tend to speak to people more locally, and I quite regularly chat with Andy, who used to live very close to here at Nash Point. He's now at the Bishop Rock, just off the Scillies, and we work him quite often.
The Bishop's Rock Lighthouse can be a lonely place for the three keepers who spend 28 days at a time on duty. But one of them, Andy Blower, has a way of passing some of this time. I asked him about his involvement with amateur radio.
With 3 trappies locked up in a place like this for a month at a time, you still need to have a little bit of external contact at times. Talking on amateur radio gets me around and about out of it, and I just talk to most anybody anywhere in the world.
Tell me, Andy, how many friends have you made worldwide with amateur radio so far?
Oh, worldwide, that's something I've never bothered to count. Innumerable, I think, innumerable. We had letters from people across the water, America, Australia, New Zealand, different places all around the world, and everybody knows me as Andy, which of course is the name we use on the air. And not so long ago I received a card from America which just said, Andy the Light, Isles of Scilly, England, and believe it or not, it found me, so I think we've made quite a few friends, I think, that over the years, for which we're very grateful. G3RWX,
GW3RWX in South Wales, signing Clare with G3UUZ and the Bishop's Rock Lighthouse. Very good afternoon there, Andy.
GW8NBK from GW3ZXI. Yes, good morning, Jonathan. Nice signal yourself, no problems at all. And very good morning, Claire, feeling there.
Yes, Jonathan Eastman is a 16-year-old schoolboy who operates on VHF only. The earliest age one can hold a license is 14, and Jonathan, even now, is working towards his full license.
Jonathan, I wonder if I can butt in here at the moment. You're 16. What started you off in amateur radio?
Well, I've been interested in electronics, Dave, for about 6 years. And only recently, about 2 years ago, I started to be interested in amateur radio. And the way I discovered it was through my interest in radio astronomy. I made a particular kind of receiver and discovered the 2-meter amateur band. And because I became very interested in this and decided I must take the exam and join everybody else. Yeah.
Yes. Having a look around the station here and seeing all the equipment you've got, it looks a rather expensive hobby. Is this true?
Well, I think it can be if you buy all commercial gear. But of course, it's possible to construct a lot of it yourself. And lots of people get great pleasure from making and operating gear which they've built themselves.
At the moment, Jonathan, you're a GW8. Are you working towards your full license?
Yes, I am. With the aid of, you know, slow Morse transmissions and, you know, practice myself off tapes and things.
As with any group of people bonded together by a common interest, it's not surprising that in the early days of experimentation, enthusiasts gathered together. The first organised radio club was formed in Derby in 1911. And this was closely followed by the formation of the London Wireless Society in 1913. Other clubs were formed as the interest increased. As the years went on, the London Society was restructured to become the Radio Society of Great Britain, representing all the amateurs in the United Kingdom, with its present headquarters in Doughty Street, London. The general manager is David Evans.
You can visualise the scale of amateur radio by the fact that there are now just over 1 million licensed amateur radio stations in the world, and there are some 104 national societies looking after these people, such as ours.
And how many amateurs in the UK are members of the RSGB?
There are just over 24,700 licensed radio amateurs in the United Kingdom, and we have about 60% of these as members.
Now, by being a member of the RSGB, what do you do for me? What do you do for members as a whole?
I think one of our main functions is the production of books and other publications. Our monthly magazine, for example, called Radio Communications. And in these publications, we're essentially trying to get over quite complex technical facts sometimes to people who are not technically based. This is a team effort. The books are mainly written by volunteers from our membership. We have a committee who sort of organises the writing and so on, and we also employ a full-time book editor. So it is really a team effort.
Serving the needs of some 23,000 members, this needs an awful lot of organisation. How do you cope?
Well, it's quite a job, actually. We used to do most of this manually. About 3 years ago, we introduced a computer into this building, and this has enabled us to cope with 24,000 members and an enormous amount of book sales, because obviously, having produced the books, we have to sell them. And it is the computer which is the key here. We offer a number of membership services, from achievement awards to organising on-air competitions, exhibitions, conventions, slow Morse transmissions. The slow Morse transmissions are designed for two types of people. One is the Class B licensee, the VHF-only licence, to upgrade to a Class A licence to permit him to transmit on the shortwave bands. The other audience is, of course, the shortwave listener, who is learning Morse for the first time. We have another unique facility which is not shared by other organisations dealing with other hobbies and topics. In common with the BBC and the IBA, we have a special licence to broadcast news bulletins. These are transmitted every Sunday from a number of locations around the United Kingdom. And in fact, anyone with a suitable receiver can pick up these transmissions. They're transmitted on the 2-metre VHF amateur band and also the 80-metre shortwave amateur band.
We've heard an outline of the history of amateur radio, and now we move towards the 1980s. Progress has been enormous during the past 50 years, giving the present-day amateur the choice of operating from medium waves to microwaves by either speech, Morse, television or data systems, by bouncing signals off the moon or contacting other amateurs via satellites that have been designed and constructed by radio amateurs. A hobby can be constructive, building of equipment, but primarily it is communicating. And from the systems mentioned, the most commonly used is speech, where English is the favoured language. Morse code does have advantages in establishing reliable communication under difficult conditions, and it also enables two people to converse by using international keywords when there is no common spoken word. The future undoubtedly will see more reliable and efficient methods of communication, and I'm certain that amateurs will be in the forefront of these developments.
We've seen some of the activities of today's amateurs. There are, of course, more serious aspects. Natural disasters, such as the earthquakes in Alaska, New Mexico, and northern Italy, had to rely on radio amateurs to provide the initial communication links with the outside world when the commercial landlines were severed. Nearer home, tragedies such as the Stockport air disaster, the East Coast floods, and the forest fires in Staffordshire made use of the amateur networks until the civil authorities were able to take over. The most recent case of amateur involvement was in December last year during the ambulance strike in Birmingham.
For the last few days, around 100 West Midlands radio hands in their own radio-equipped cars have been working round the clock in shifts. They've been tailing every ambulance driven by the volunteer St John ambulance men and providing the two-way radio link missing from the St John vehicles. Back at the St John ambulance headquarters in Birmingham, other radio hands have relayed messages and directions which have saved vital minutes in an emergency.
One of the men heavily involved was the assistant controller of the emergency network in Birmingham, Tom Douglas, G3BA. Tom, exactly how does the emergency network work?
Well, it was in 1953 with the East Coast floods that started it all off. Radio amateurs at that time helped out the civil authorities in maintaining communication. As a result of that, the Radio Society sponsored the Radio Amateur Emergency Network, or RAYNET for short. Now, the radio amateurs who are concerned with this are interested in public service rather than radio just being a fun thing. And as such, we assist the public authority, the Red Cross, the St John's Ambulance Brigade, and the police.
Yes, well, we heard vaguely what happened in the Birmingham ambulance strike. Can you fill in a few more details?
Well, we were called out on the Saturday, and within 1 hour, we had set up a communication centre at St John's Ambulance headquarters, and from then on, for the next 18 days, 24 hours a day, we maintained communications throughout the West Midlands.
What about the Staffordshire forest fires?
Well, that was the first time I myself was concerned with RAYNET in the real situation, and we helped the fire service with auxiliary communication because their own communication was tied up.
I see. I see you're wearing a very special tie. Perhaps you'd like to tell us about it and how you got involved in emergency service in the first place.
Well, this tie is from the Far Eastern Prisoner of War Club, and I suppose in the war I wasn't a very good soldier, and the only thing that I felt that I could be of use in as a prisoner of war in Japanese hands in Burma was to build amateur radio receivers, take the news from London, from the BBC, and give this to my fellow prisoners.
And how did you actually make these sets?
Well, we made it out of bits and pieces that were brought up from Singapore, from working parties there, into Siam by enthusiasts who said, somewhere or other, somebody must be able to put this together.
Oh, thank you, Tom. You know, amateur radio is unique in as much as it is a means of communication without having to leave your home. And this is, of course, ideally suited to those who are handicapped. In fact, one of the clubs affiliated to the RSGB is the Radio Amateur Invalid and Bedfast Club, which has 700 members in this country. The 607080 show went along to one of the Cheshire homes to talk to Mrs. Betty Houghton.
G3HRJ, G4 Echo Victor Mike here, John. Well, first let me explain as to why I am interested in the radio amateur. I heard a lot of the receiving side of it, and when a person speaks to you, you automatically want to answer back. So of course I took the RAE and got it in about 5 weeks. The reason being, when one is confined to 4 walls, one automatically wants to know what's going on in the outside world. That's fairly obvious to me, if not to others. But John, it gives me great pleasure to speak to you and to our many other friends whom we have made since we have been on radio. My grateful thanks to you, John. G3HRJ, G4 Echo Victor Mike, now going QRT. Bye-bye, John. Bye-bye.
There's nothing, I think, more trying to a disabled or blind person than to feel different from other people. That's the whole thing. Amateur radio allows anybody, my friend Paul Bates, for instance, completely inert, but for the tips of 2 fingers. And yet he talks to the world on absolutely level terms. For people who are handicapped in particular, for people who are getting on a bit, people who don't know what on earth to do with their time when they are retiring next week, retiring next year, how can I fill in the time? Well, all the radio amateurs I know, and I know thousands and thousands of them all over the world, the days are all too short. A doorway to the world, no frontiers, language really no bar, because English is the language of the world nowadays.
Helping others less fortunate than yourself and providing a medium in which the handicapped can compete on equal terms are certainly important aspects of amateur radio. But the hobby has not forgotten its early contributions to the scene of radio. For many years, Pat Hawker of the Independent Broadcasting Authority, but G3VA in his spare time, has been writing about the technical and scientific side of amateur radio.
You know, every amateur still dreams of coming up with the answer to one of the many question marks that even today surround the propagation of radio waves, or else devising some really new type of aerial or equipment. And a lot of them see their dreams come true. There's a very good reason for this. It's a large number of them who take part in tests or plod along in their own time. No professional research group could afford to employ thousands of trained people, all providing their own equipment and all doing it for free. There's a classic story of how Bell Telephone stopped Karl Jansky from investigating the strange noises he received from the sky in the early 1930s. It was left to an American ham, Grote Weber W9 GFZ, to build the world's very first steerable radio telescope in his own back garden and map those signals from outer space. In doing so, he started the whole new science of radio astronomy. And more recently, amateurs discovered the VHF propagation mode known as transequatorial propagation, one form of which depends on plasma bubbles that rise high above the normal ionosphere. It may all sound very technical, but the result is what few people thought possible: contacts over very long distances on the amateur 2-meter band without using either satellites or the moon as a reflector. Some amateurs are investigating mysterious long delay echoes. Others are looking into the whispering gallery mode of high-frequency propagation, which means that the signals go round the world without coming down in a whole series of hops. And the latest puzzle that simply cries out to be solved are the curious atmospherics that sweep or creep across the 10-meter band. Lots of people have heard them, but nobody knows yet what causes them. For many youngsters, amateur radio is a stepping stone to a lifetime career in communications, electronics or broadcasting. The BBC has lots of people on its staff who started out as radio amateurs. So I'm glad to say, do we in independent television. Many of us begin as schoolboys, and certainly I did. For radio communication can still fire the imagination, just as it did for those who heard Marconi or his spark transmitters. And even if we never make any more fundamental discoveries, well, it's all been great fun finding about two-way radio, and I've certainly found it so.
So far in the programme, we've seen how amateur radio is organised in Great Britain. But as we've already said, there are over 1 million amateurs all over the world. The controlling body is the International Amateur Radio Union. Their secretary for Europe, Africa and parts of Asia is Roy Stevens.
Let us first consider the basis of all types of radio communication, which is the availability of frequencies not only for radio amateurs, but also for aircraft, ships, broadcasting stations and many other services. The radio spectrum is a very precious national resource available to all countries. The spectrum is limited and therefore its use must be very carefully regulated in order to obtain the best results. The organisation responsible for this regulation throughout the world is the International Telecommunication Union, a specialist agency of the United Nations with its headquarters in Geneva and at present consisting of 154 member nations. Its most important conference of 20 years takes place next September to decide how the frequencies shall be allocated. Each country has just one vote. In view of the worldwide demand for additional radio frequencies for all sorts of purposes, we did at one time feel that amateur radio would be hard put to maintain its present allocations. But there is a considerable amount of support for amateur radio around the world. Following a great deal of preparatory work, the IRU and the national societies throughout the world have come to an agreement on the needs of radio amateurs. But unfortunately, there are still some administrators who do not realize that a scientific hobby, such as amateur radio, can bring a worthwhile technical education at absolutely no cost to the country concerned. In many areas, amateur radio is handicapped by a lack of components to build equipment. In many towns in Africa, for instance, it is quite impossible to obtain items that one can readily find in shops in Western Europe. The IRU are very much aware of this difficulty and in fact have developed a simple receiver in kit form which is capable of worldwide reception. This is being sent to developing countries where there is a national society. As an indication of the progress of amateur radio throughout the world, there are now 104 national societies in the IARU.
We've tried in this program to show you facets of a hobby which embraces all means of communications, whether it be by Morse, speech or television. Amateurs come from all walks of life. For some, it provides a basis of a technical education. For others, an outlet for continued experimentation. Many lasting friendships are struck up by people who know as much about the other person as relatives, but they've never seen each other. It's a responsible hobby. Through its members, it can and has saved lives, and will continue to do so as long as the hobby flourishes. It knows no international boundaries, and one can talk freely to anyone else in the world, regardless of geographic or political limitations. If you want to know more about amateur radio, please write to the Radio Society of Great Britain, 35 Doughty Street, London, WC1N 2AE, and mark your envelopes Open Door. That's the Radio Society of Great Britain, 35 Doughty Street, London, WC1N 2AE, marking your envelope Open Door. And now, on behalf of us all, may I, as G2DQU, say 73, which is our way, the radio amateurs' way of sending you in international language our best wishes.
Juliet in Freiburg. I'm very, very sorry to hear that Joe hasn't received the information yet.
That programme can be seen again on Sunday afternoon at 3:15. Next week's Open Door is made by the Campaign Against Racism.